Welcome to another episode of the Sperging Out Podcast. My name is Mitch Grace, and I'm the author of the book Growing Up with Asperger's, Lessons Learned and Shareable Wisdom. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, as well as the next episode, as occasionally my co-host extraordinaire and I are going to want to talk about one specific subject, whether it be solely autism related or something not autism related. We just want to screw around for a bit. This episode is going to be solely focused on an autism-related subject, and in preparation for the book being released, it's something I will continue to say on this podcast. It's something I say in the book, but I strongly encourage parents as well as their kiddos and autistic individuals of all ages to get evaluated and tested. Because as we discussed in a previous episode, being diagnosed as autism and being tested and evaluated for autism, and I'm giggling because my co-host extraordinaire.
Smiling.
I don't know. It's a type of smile where I interpret that smile as I'm trying to keep in a joke. So, with that being said, co-host extraordinaire, how are you today?
I'm good. So I'm looking over. Should I just jump into it?
Well, just one last thing I want to preface. So like I said, in preparation for the book being released, I did find a clinic, and I did pay them to test and evaluate me to see a whole bunch of tests and questionnaires. And while at the time of recording, I haven't gotten the final results, as the doctor wants to discuss my early years with my mom and dad. We do have the initial questionnaire they required me to fill out before the all-day evaluation could be even scheduled. And my co-host extraordinaire has that, and we're going to go over some of it with you today.
Okay. So yes, like Mitch said, I have the Child and Adult Comprehensive Evaluation Intake Packet that he had filled out for this evaluation. So I'm just going to go page by page and ask questions about really the more interesting things, because some of this stuff is obvious, like, what's your name? How old are you? You know, things that every packet has to ask. But there's some interesting stuff in here, like on the first page, what are your goals for this evaluation? What questions would you like to be answered? And you wrote, to understand my autism better. Could you elaborate on, like, what you really mean by that, Mitch?
I mean, yeah, I was diagnosed with autism at summer 2010, and that was when I was in high school. That was when I had a very limited understanding of what autism is, how it affected me, and whatnot. But like I said, that was in 2010. It is currently 2024, so that's 14 years of lived experiences as well as things I've researched on my own, either via the internet, via media, or just interacting with people in real life. So I wanted a real medical professional evaluation of, okay, this is how your autism affects you. Here's where it's a strength, and here's where it's a weakness that you can improve upon through such and such and such.
Okay. That's a very good reason to do an evaluation such as this. This is very in-depth. There's a lot of questions, a lot of detail. We're going to be going over, probably skimming through a lot of it, because it is a humongous packet of questions.
It is. It took me quite a long time to do.
One thing that struck me, on the first page, was when did you first notice these concerns? And you said since you were an infant, you had issues with loud, sudden noises.
Yeah, that is true. While I don't remember this exact instant, I may have told this story before on the podcast. I'll tell it again. So there was a family friend, may he rest in peace, who owned a cement mixing factory. And of course, cement trucks. My parents took me there one day, and when I was an infant, and my family friend got in his cement truck. My mom or dad placed me on his lap, and he was trying to be fun. He honked the horn of the cement truck. It was loud. It was sudden. I didn't know it was coming, and according to my parents, I just started bawling. I started crying my eyes out, and of course, my family friend was like, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?" And my dad and mom had to assure them that you're okay, but this is new. He has not done this before, so something's up. So So yeah, I wasn't aware of it, but according to my parents, yeah, no, I showed signs as early as being an infant.
Okay, I think that's really interesting. On the last episode of the podcast, we talked about early symptoms or early signs that someone has autism, and I focused heavily on speech delays. But that's actually another very common early sign is, even as an infant, is having difficulty with loud noises or specific noises. They're usually noises that everyone hates, but oftentimes the infant or kindergartner or child has much worse reaction, like nails on a chalkboard. Everyone hates that sound. But that one, I mean, really sets a lot of infants off, where they just cry and cry and cry like they're under attack. And that's another very early sign.
Yeah, I really don't know what it was like back then, but I can tell you now, while it's not, I don't know if this is autism related or if I just have sensitive hearing, but if a high pitched noise at a specific volume level is like happening, my ears will start to hurt, and you will see the reaction of my face. The most common one that I encounter is infants or babies or toddlers or even small children crying, like loudly, and not the whole wah wah. It's the, I'm sorry, editor, wah, you know that noise.
Average baby.
So, anyways, continue.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about some of my other clients that also have sensory issues when it comes to sound. I think I mentioned in the last podcast, or maybe I didn't. But I have a client that we couldn't go to a coffee shop for a long time because just the sound of the grinder in the background or them making coffee would make him angry. He would start like getting frustrated and be like, "It's so loud in here," and it would be like such a mild sound that my brain would drone it out. I wouldn't even notice.
Can you describe what the grinder sounded like?
I mean, it was loud because it was a commercial grinder, but it was.
What do you mean
just that loud?
And what do you mean a commercial grinder? Like it's bigger than one you'd have at your own home?
Yes, it's a large grinder made for grinding like an entire pound of coffee beans.
So it wasn't pitch wise. It was kind of like neutral or maybe even low.
It wasn't very sharp. It was pretty mild, the sound, but it was constant. It was a drone, and that set the client off.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, let me ask you this. Have any of your other clients reacted in a similar way to like if a blender is going off?
I haven't had any clients react that way, but I also haven't blended a lot of things with clients. I blended with one client maybe ever. But back in college, one of my roommates was on the autism spectrum. And whenever he was driving, if someone would hit the horn on the car, on any car, he would start like shaking his hand on the steering wheel, and he was like, "Oh, sorry, I just really hate that sound."
Really?
And that was actually the first time he told me he had autism, was because he did that while driving, and it scared us a teeny bit.
That's interesting. Car horns.
But yeah, it was one of those sounds that, like, again, no one really likes hearing it, but their reaction was extreme.
I'll give you another more recent example involving a blender, which is why I brought it up initially. There was an instant. So I worked at a fancy restaurant in downtown, and what this fancy restaurant did was I worked behind the bar, and they made milkshakes if you want a dessert. And so they had a blender behind the bar. There were instances where I was doing my thing, I was working, doing something, and all of a sudden I would hear the blender go off, and I'd get really startled and be like, "Oh my gosh!" And so and it was a high-pitched blender, and there were instances where I'm like, okay, I kind of have to step away for a bit and do something else because that noise just really didn't click with me. But
that is a common symptom of people with autism, and it's not really something you can therapy away. It's just one of those sensory issues.
Oh, that's unfortunate. What else about the packet stuck out to you?
All right, on the second page, you start writing down like what is your diagnosis, and you put autism, and then what issues you've had or behavioral problems or symptoms. And I noticed a big pattern throughout this packet, including this page, a lot of school difficulties, early age school difficulties, and ADHD related things. So do you want to expound upon that?
Yes. So the biggest thing was I was loud. Like volume control wasn't exactly a thing for me back then. My parents will tell you this, and I'm certain I guarantee you my teachers would as well. in the sense that if I thought of something that I wanted to say, it had to come out. And since I was the class clown, that kind of meant, oh, if he thinks of a joke, whether it's good or not, whether it's class appropriate or not, he's going to say it. And so there were many instances where there was, okay, I have a specific memory of this. I was in first grade. We were reading a book as a class about a hippopotamus named Hoppleton, I want to say. And I think the story for the children's book goes that Hoppleton the hippopotamus is like trying on different clothes and whatnot. And at one point, the Hoppleton like stands on his hind legs, and the exact quote of the book is with his bottom in the air. So it's a cartoon hippopotamus, so of course nothing of it. Me and my classmates were reading the book outside the classroom. We were in groups, and everyone else was inside the classroom. And when the teacher asked us to come back in, I thought it would be hilarious if I stood on my hands and head with my butt in the air and I said, "I'm Hoppleton." And the entire class lost their shit. They all laughed, and the first grade teacher took me outside and said, "Hey, you can't do that. Hey, you need to stop doing that." And I was just like, why? What did I do wrong? And so imagine those instances where the teacher takes me outside the classroom and talks to me all throughout elementary school. It happened in kindergarten, first grade, second, third, fourth, and fifth.
Oh, man.
It happened in sixth, I want to say. I don't think it happened in seventh and eighth. No, I take it back. It did happen in sixth. It did happen in seventh. It happened in eighth, and it happened my freshman year of high school. Although, to be fair, that one, in high school, I was put on a stronger dosage of a medication, and so I was starting to pass out when I hadn't previously. And my teacher was like, "Hey, is everything okay?"
Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually a serious one.
So, yes, behavioral problems were a thing, but I wasn't getting detention constantly. It was just I was being disruptive.
Okay.
What else? What else did the packet say on that subject?
It had that and ADHD, difficulty focusing and paying attention during class.
Yep.
Did you struggle with your grades and actual schoolwork because of that?
So, yes, but I would say that was very much my own fault to definitely to a major extent, because so whenever I was assigned homework, I just wouldn't do it in middle school. I would just tell my parents, "Oh yeah, I did it," then I didn't. And then when my report cards came back, my teacher's like, "Hey, he has 40s and 30s in these grades, and he hasn't done any of his homework." And my parents like, "You told us you did do this homework." And I'm just like, and they're like, "Well, you're fucking grounded."
I've run into this with some of my clients actually, just recently. The one in college even.
Mm-hmm. And so
he's been lying about doing his work.
Oh.
And just straight up lying to everyone about yeah, I did it. And I guess thinking about it, I've seen that pattern in behavior in my younger clients primarily. But that's also very common in autism, is this almost short-term avoidance so that the long-term thinking where it's back of your mind, you can't get away with it. But there's this pressure to be avoided so quickly early on that you're long-term thinking, doesn't matter. I'll just short-term avoid it.
Yeah, and in sixth grade, that was a huge problem. And then my parents "You're fucking grounded until you get your grades up." And so I got them to C's. And while my parents weren't exactly thrilled with them being C's, they're like, "All right, you're passing. You can have your shit back." Seventh and eighth grade, that wasn't as much of a problem. Whenever I did struggle, it was because I was genuinely struggling. Okay, and so my parents were like, "Okay, we're not going to grant you for this. We need to get you help.
You're not in trouble, but you're going to get a tutor."
Mm-hmm. And so... freshman year of high school, it was bad. It was it reared that whole, I'm going to lie about doing my homework. It reared its head again. Not to justify it, but that was when my parents told me, "Hey, we're getting a divorce." And so I was just an emotional wreck at this point. So I don't want to do anything. And that was when I was still in the public high school my freshman year, when socially that was at my lowest point. However, when I got to the Montessori school for that one semester, which I do talk about in my book, It was in a better situation, and I actually did the homework, and my grades did improve. But there were some other situations there that I was like, I think my education's actually as good as I need it to be. So, and then to close out this segment, the the school I went to with that specialized in teaching kiddos with learning differences, as they call it, they so when I went to that school with my parents and they interviewed my parents like, okay, hey, here's what we do here. Here's why we think your kid should go here, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things the teachers said where they're like, hey, if your kid doesn't turn in a homework assignment, you get an email. And so right then and there during that meeting, it was like, oh, so I can't skip homework now. I absolutely have to do it, or else I'm going to get shit from my parents. So at that point, I made the honor roll every year. So I did the homework. I did well in schools and whatnot. And interestingly enough, in the like at the time, I didn't think they were bluffing. The school was like, we send your kids an
It's
email.
probably automatic.
So it turns out, I did not think they were bluffing but afterwards, when I was in college, I was like, were they bluffing? But then there was an instance where my senior year, I went home with a friend of mine because we had an event to go to later that day, and I forgot to tell my mom and dad about it. So my friend was like, "Oh, just hang out with me for a bit. I'll call my mom. Yeah, it'll be totally fine." And so we made the arrangements, and so I was in the I was. You ever been in one of those situations? Have you ever been at a friend's house and their parents start yelling at them, but the parents are completely justified in yelling at them?
Yeah.
So it was one of those situations. This classmate of mine had done what I had did in middle school. He had told his parents he was doing his homework. He was not, and his parents got an email. And so here we are playing a game in his room, and then his mom barges in and says, "Hey, you haven't done your math homework." And he says, "But I have been doing his math homework." And she said, "I got an email from your math teacher, and she says you hadn't. She says you had missed 2 or 3 assignments." And I'm just sitting there going, "Oh no, oh no." I'm just so desperately trying not to just not get involved. And here's the thing. On top of all the BS,
There's no escaping this conversation.
Literally. So
you should have joined her. You should have been like, "Damn, bro, you didn't do your homework?"
Man, I was so scared of his mom that any thought of doing something snarky like that just was not in my brain.
Fair.
So to your point about autistic people having somewhat of an aversion to doing homework, especially if they don't want to do it, whole short-term, long-term thing, that school, that method of, hey, we're going to hold your kids accountable because if you don't do your thing that we'll assign you to do, your parents are going to get an email. That is great.
Yes,
that is
agreed.
I understand that public schools, that's kind of an impossible task because, of the pure logistics of it. But that was so good for my studies. That was so excellent. Just that whole hanging over your head of, hey, you should do this because if you don't, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, actually, a lot of the programs that are specialized for individuals with autism have that built in, where if you don't show up to class, someone comes to your dorm to get you. Or if you don't do an assignment, your professor will send an email to your parents or to you, or they will pull you out of class to be like, "Hey, you haven't done your assignment." They will not let you slip through the cracks. Because a really common pattern of behavior in individuals with autism is idiosyncratic demand avoidance, which means
what?
They reflexively avoid a demand made of them. Just on reflex. Not even a real reason sometimes. Sometimes it's anxiety based, but sometimes it's just like, I don't want to do it. So they will go to any lengths oftentimes to avoid the demand. So I have clients that come up with the most insane excuses for why they'll never be able to drive. They'll never have a job, or they can't do their work. They just can't read. I've had clients tell me they don't know how to read at 20. And you're like, okay, I know you know how to read. Why would you lie to me like this? Because they don't want to. And so it's very, very effective is to hold them accountable and just be like, no. You can say whatever you want to say. You're still doing the assignment because I know you can.
That's...
Same with cooking. Cooking's another one. A lot of skills throughout life are just avoided by individuals with autism as they grow up. and then they get to adulthood and realize they have deficits because they don't know how to do things that most everyone else knows how to do.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question about that later in a bit, but that was something I had regarding cooking. I hate cooking. If you were to ask me, hey, here's a chicken breast, cook it, I will be able to do so. I can say that, but I had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah.
I learned all that when I was already on my own, living in an apartment during my final college years. And my mom was like, I'm not going to fucking do this for you. To be fair, I did not ask her to do that. I just want to get that out there. I did not ask her to do this, but my doctor did say, you need to start eating healthier. I'm like, all right, what do you recommend? He says, here's some foods you can eat. I'm like, shit, I have to cook this. Man, I have to fucking cook this.
I have a client who's exactly the same. He's in college and he's microwaved every meal in his entire life, or his parents have cooked it for him. So now that he's living alone and has to cook real food sometimes, he hates it. He throws the biggest hissy fit. And he's like, why can't I just eat TV dinners the rest of my life? And I was like, why would you want to? That's miserable.
Yeah, I hate cooking. Like, again, gun to my head, I can, and sometimes, and I know this is not technically cooking, but I actually like making myself sandwiches.
Oh yeah,
I actually enjoy it.
Oh, that's a whole. We could have a whole episode of the podcast debating whether making a sandwich is cooking or not.
I'm sure we could. Well, that's why I said I personally don't classify it as cooking because it's, what am I cooking?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it cooking either.
But I can make my own food is what I'm saying. I just hate doing it.
All right, fair. Well, let's get back to the actual evaluation before we get too off tangent, because I could talk about cooking for hours. I love cooking.
Yes.
I was going through the pages, and there's one phrase that comes up: "Acted as if you were in your own world." Do you have any description for that? Because I could kind of give a rough description, because I see that in a couple of my clients.
No, I know exactly what that is. So it's essentially you're acting out your imagination. It's in your head, and you in the space you're currently in, you're like, all right, I'm just gonna act this out, whether it be conversations, arguments, or even completely imaginative scenarios. It can range from you giving a speech at the UN. It could be you fighting a bunch of skeleton warriors. It's literally your imagination. It's you just acting it out. And so it's you acting in your own world. It's a world you conjure up and whatnot.
Yeah, I have a client who does that exact thing. He will imagine a story and then begin acting out halfway through the story and then turn to me and be like, was that funny? And I'll be like, I don't know what's happening. You just started talking about characters from Caillou with no context and no punchline and no narrative through line, because it was in his head and he just thinks, oh, I thought it, so you understand. It's very common, especially with imagination in younger ages, of just again, getting bored in school and suddenly being like, I want to fight a dinosaur, and then acting that out in the middle of class or something.
Yeah, so confession time. That's something I still do whenever I'm in private. So I'll just be in my own thoughts, and then a scenario will pop up, and I'll be in my home with no one else around, with no one else watching. I'm like, all right, I'll just indulge myself for a bit.
I mean, that's just having fun, as long as you're able to contextually do it at the right situation, where you're just having fun and enjoying imagination.
Yeah, there's an episode of a show called Community, which I'm certain you and I are going to have an episode about in the future. But the characters, Troy and Abed, have a room in their apartment called the Imaginarium, which is where they act out, scenarios they come up with in their heads. Imagine that, but instead it's just just the whole house, and I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna just contain myself to this one area. I'm just gonna indulge myself for a bit.
That's fair. I have a VR room for that. Sometimes
that's right.
Futz around in the VR room without the headset like a nut job.
Yeah, I just it's when I was in high school and I was still living with my mom. There'll be times where I will act out that scenario in my own world, and my mom will walk in on me. Then I'll just freeze, and I'll just kind of keep, stand up straight with my hands to the side. And my mom will be like, "Oh, you were acting a scenario again, weren't you?" I'm just like, "Shut up, Mom."
Oh man.
But she was never mean about it. When I was at that age, she was never mean about it. But yeah. It's kind of embarrassing walking having someone walk in on you doing that. So.
I mean, the fact that you were embarrassed is a good sign. I used to have a client. They were in their 30s, and they would act out scenes from films and TV and things they'd seen
Is this
at random without any heads up, and they just wouldn't stop.
is this the client of yours that has a bunch of copies of the movie Matilda?
Yes, same client.
Okay.
They were very obsessed with film. But yeah, they would start acting out a scene, and they would call it a scene, and then they wouldn't stop. You just couldn't stop them. They would tell you what to say, and they would get mad if you didn't repeat the exact line back to them.
Huh.
That's where it goes from being, just imagination and boredom to being an actual issue, where a 30-year-old grown adult has to act out the scene. Is like, what's the word? Stimulated, pressured? There's a word for it. Compulsive. They compulsively have to act out the scene.
Let me ask, when your clients act out these scenarios, is a factor that, for lack of a term, triggers them to, that kind of gets them or prompts them to do the scenario? Are they just feeling restless at that moment? Is that a factor?
For the younger clients, that's definitely the case. It's often coincides with ADHD, which is also very often a comorbidity with autism, ADHD and autism. A lot of similar symptoms too, so it's kind of hard to separate the two at times. With younger clients, definitely. They get bored. They start thinking of a fun scenario in their head or a funny joke in their head or a funny story in their head, and they just start acting it out or talking about it without proper transition or segue. When it comes to adult clients, that's a little different. I would argue it's less about being bored and having ADHD and more about like a habit that has been formed very specifically that comforts them. Whenever they're anxious and whenever they're not feeling great, they start acting out these scenes or doing these imagined things as a form of escapism, to escape whatever is actually annoying them, which in some cases can be a healthy coping method. But if it's the only thing you're doing, then you're not solving the problem and you're not actually engaging with the issue that's making you feel bad, then obviously it's maladaptive and bad.
That's interesting, escapism. I've never really... What's up?
Oh, I was going to keep going, but if you want to keep talking.
No, keep going.
All right, I was saying the next page, you put that you used to have hand flapping or arm flapping motor issues, like stimming. Do you want to elaborate on that? That's a really good topic.
So, I wrote that down, and I think, so, this is an audio-only format, so sorry, but, me flapping my hands right now like I'm a bird, that. I mean, I'm really blanking on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if I did that when I was younger.
Okay.
I really wouldn't be so... Sorry.
Stimming is also, physical stimming like that is also very common in individuals with autism, especially at a younger age. It's actually one of those really interesting topics because historically it's been treated as like, oh, it's horrible. They can't pay attention. They have ADHD. They're shaking their body. They have no control over themselves. We have to stop it. And so old methods of therapy was to immediately stop someone from stimming. And we found out that through neuroscience and neuroimaging and EEGs and stuff, that actually before the stim begins, parts of the brain start to light up related to anxiety and compulsory impulse. And we found that if you prevent an individual with autism from stimming, it actually makes them feel really bad. Like, it causes a huge uptick in anxiety and just terrible negative emotional feelings. So the modern look at stimming is, as long as the stimming is safe and they're not like driving a car, let them do it. It's no big deal. Oh, they shake their hands a little bit? Okay, if it makes them feel better, it doesn't hurt anyone, So these days, most of the time when a client stims, I just let them stim, as long as they're not putting themselves in danger.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's actually a really hotly debated topic in the field of therapy because of the historical precedence of stopping it and how signaling it is. When someone stims in public, they signal to everyone around them that they have autism or something's going on. But if it causes emotional trauma to stop them from doing it, then why would you stop them,
That is a fair point. Especially if it's not harming anyone.
Yeah.
If it's hand flapping and you're in a, not a movie theater, but like in a like if you're walking around the mall or something, most people, if they look at you, it's gonna be like quick. It's gonna be a quick like, oh, that's happening. Then they're gonna move on. Like they don't. People don't give a shit
Yeah,
about
exactly.
this stimming. They're gonna be like, huh. They might think to themselves, huh, that's kind of odd. But then they're gonna move on with their lives.
Sometimes they like it. I had a client who worked in a kitchen as a food prep, and he would do jazz hands and go woo. And every time he did it, everyone in the kitchen would stop what they're doing and join him and do it. And they just all really enjoyed it and had a good time.
Like not insultingly.
No, they're having fun. They loved it. They love that guy.
That's
they
okay.
they thought he was awesome. He was
Man.
so much fun to hang out with while he was working.
That is, man. That's very. I'm not a fan of this word, but wholesome. That's very nice to
Oh,
hear.
yeah.
It's nice.
It was super wholesome, that kitchen.
That is good to know. What else sticks out to you about the packet?
Just some of the more common things. Like this section's all about restricted interests, being hyper fixated on like your specific interests and having a hard time talking or expressing with people about interests that are outside of that.
Yeah, I would. I think I remember my parents saying that, especially in middle school. I think this is when it really became a problem. Because when I was in elementary school, the friends I hung out with, I talked about only a few things to them because they liked it too, and so we were elementary school kids. Our palettes of interests weren't exactly exquisite back then.
Oh yeah.
In middle school, it started to become a problem, especially as some of my friends that I had were more sports oriented, and I didn't give two craps about sports at that point. I would always try to steer the conversation. Like, for example, I had a friend back then who was like, "Oh man, this baseball! I love baseball. Oh, I love racing. I love stock car racing. Like, I don't know anything about that. Hey, let's talk about Pokemon. I don't know anything about Pokemon. I'd have nothing to contribute to this. Oh, you like Transformers? I like Transformers. I mean, kind of, but like, I like this one movie." And so my friends, and I guess eventually my parents would express to me that, hey, you need to take interest in other people's interests. Like, not everyone's gonna like Pokemon. Not everyone's gonna like Power Rangers.
Yeah, I can't talk about trains all day.
Listen,
I knew that'd get you.
you are correct, sir. You are correct. But I mean, in high school, that started to not be as much of an issue because I think I got more inquisitive. Where it's like, ooh, Michael Jordan, who's that? Or, oh yeah, Wayne Gretzky, who's that? Or, Michael Andretti, who's that? And so I started, range. Oh my gosh, music. It was the absolute worst with music. I really didn't develop a taste of music until I was in high school. And when I was in my freshman year of high school, my iPod had 6 songs on it.
Oh my gosh.
6, because I just did not like music growing up for whatever reason. Maybe it was the noise. Well, then I don't know why. I'm sure that's something my mom and dad could very much elaborate on. But whenever someone would say, "Oh, hey, did you see this new Taylor Swift album that came out?" When I was in middle school, I'd be like, "Hey, that's cool. Hey, but did you hear that Pokemon is coming out with a new game?" And they'd be like, "What the fuck, Mitch?" And so
No segue, no transition. Just now I want to talk about my subject matter.
literally, though,
That's very common, especially the way you described it, where as a kiddo, in like elementary school, no big deal, even early middle school, every kid does that in those ages. But they eventually, they get socialized to like, okay, I need to broaden my horizons and talk with people about what they're interested in. And then individuals with autism don't reach that point or have struggle to get past that point, so they have to explicitly, forcefully teach themselves to express interest in others.
Yeah, the worst of this was when I was interested in a girl in high school, and she's a good old country girl, and so she loved the show Duck Dynasty, and she and this other classmate that was also a guy, obviously, that was country, they would often make jokes about it. It's like, oh, I want this girl to like me, so I'm gonna start watching Duck Dynasty. That way I can start making jokes. And guess what? She still wasn't interested in me. So, yeah, that can. There's a bad version of.
I mean, it's a good effort to show, though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying.
Moving on in the packet.
Moving on, and the next section's about
Adherence to routines.
Okay.
So
You pretty much checked every box in that section about being stringent on routines and stuck in them to the point where you become anxious or uncomfortable changing routine.
Yeah.
That's very common in individuals with autism. It kind of stems back to the same idiosyncratic demand avoidance thing where it's like routines are a comfort zone for everyone. Everyone's comfortable in their routine, and people in general, everyone, doesn't like changing their routine. But eventually, we change our routines because we have to, or it's just beneficial. But individuals with autism, that anxiety becomes like a wall, a blockade they can't circumvent normally. So they will stick with a routine even to the point where the routine is detrimental to their health or well-being.
Yeah, there's I have my morning routine down to a darn science, and then my after work routine, I have it down to a science. And when I say routine, it's the things of the things I need to do every morning before I go to work, and the things I need to do every time before when I get home from work. When I have I have my alarm set to where if I slept well, I can get up and go do what I need to do without struggling. However, if I slept poorly the previous night, my alarm will be set at a time where it's like, okay, I have enough of a grace period where I can just kind of collect myself for the day, and then I can go do what I need to do. And so I have enough leeway there. With evenings, it's the same way. It's like, all right, I need to do this, and then I need to do this, and then I have to go to bed at this time. Everything in between there, whatever. And then I have my food scheduled. Well, I say scheduled, but I have, at this specific time every day. When I'm at work, I go and get lunch. And then same with my dinner. After this is done, that's when I eat dinner as fast as possible. And I try to have dinner on the plate before this specific time. And so whenever there's a change, it's like, ugh. I'm just like, I don't want to do this. Oh my gosh. God.
I would hate being an in-home therapist. My work hours are not rigid, so I every day I wake up, I'm like, I don't know who I'm seeing today. And then every day it's like, am I eating in my car? Am I eating lunch in my car? Am I eating a QT taquito for dinner today?
How do you do that? Seriously, though, how do you do that?
You just get used to it. You just go, yeah, whatever. I don't know. Adapt, improvise, overcome.
Thanks, Bear Grylls.
You just get used to it where you're like, yeah, this sucks a little, but don't have a choice. I'd rather get paid.
I'm aware enough of my routine where it's like, okay, yes, I could change this and it'd be beneficial. I could change this, and it'd be beneficial. But the thing is, I'm fucking lazy, and it would also require me to get up earlier in the morning. And I love sleep. I love sleeping, and so I would either have to go to sleep early. I'd have to go to sleep earlier. And I don't want to do that because when I get home from work, I just want to do absolutely fuck all. And so I was like, no, I just want to sit on the couch and just be a piece of moss for a couple hours. Then I'll sleep. And now you're telling me I have less time of that? No, fuck that.
I know that. I think everyone feels that way when they get home from work and they're like, oh, I got to do chores today. I just wanted to play video games and not exist for 4 hours and then go to sleep.
It's gotten to the point where there are specific days where all right, when I get home, I have this chore to do, I have this chore to do, I have this chore to do, and then I'll have maybe an hour to do something, and then I'll go to sleep. And so it's like, ugh.
Oh,
That's
the most miserable feeling.
Yeah, but enough about our real life struggles. What about this packet?
Actually, yeah. This is kind of related. The next extra pack is all about mood and anger and just emotions. So I'm not going to specifically say anything, but if you want to give a brief overview of any emotional difficulties you faced that you think are related to autism.
Yeah, I've always had strong emotions. When I was this lasted even until the early parts of high school, I think. Whenever I would get into a heated argument with my parents and I'd get really upset, I would start crying. My emotions would be just so strong, I would just start shedding tears. And I would have back then I had a very short fuse. I would get angry at the slightest thing. I'd start throwing temper tantrums, and my parents would get really frustrated. Be like, really? Really, Mitch? This is what's bothering you? Just calm down. And of course, me being told to calm down by an angry person, that would just get me even more upset.
Oh, yeah.
And so yeah, I had a really bad temper problem back then.
Oh, I can really sympathize with that. I had anger issues as a kid too. I would get really, really, really angry really quickly, and then cool off 30 minutes later, way too quickly. to the point my mom would be like, how can you get this angry and then just be okay 30 minutes later like it didn't happen? And that's when I realized it wasn't normal to do that. And now I'm very zenned out and rarely get angry.
The interesting thing is, well, because you were okay, so you were able to cool off within half an hour. For me, it would take a number of hours for me, fully.
It'd be like long-term anger.
Yeah, but it was always long term. Like the short fuse, the slightest thing would set me off, and it'd be long term anger, and of course that would just. It was not a pleasant experience for all parties involved, and so that's a lot. I look back on it now. I'm just like that was a lot of wasted energy.
Yeah. Was there anything you did that helped with that? Because I mean, you're obviously, in my experience, not a very angry person now.
Thank you.
So
thank
something.
you.
Did you like put in a concerted effort, or I don't know, thought about it in a specific way?
I mean, the truth be told, there are instances where I do have a short fuse, but I've been able to contain it to where it only happens in private most of the time. There was one instance recently where I was trying to schedule an MRI. I'd already spoken to someone who said it's going to be at this location, it's going to be at this time, and so I was calling. You just need to call and do it because I can't do it here. I said, all right. So I called. I'm getting angry just thinking about it, but this one scheduler was like very efficient. She was like, okay, it's at this. Thank you. Have a good one. This person said, okay, you want it this time? Okay, let me check. Oh, it looks like we don't have availability at this time. But what do you mean? The other person I talked to that I just spoke with said that you do have it available. She said, oh, wait, actually, no, we do have it at this point. We do have it this time, so it's just come on by. It's going to cost you this much money. And I'm like, that much money? The person I talked to previously said that it was because it was going to cost this much money. She said, what? Okay, let me check. Oh, you know what? Yep, it is going to cost this much. And imagine that on repeat for like a solid 15 minutes where she would say, like, it's going to cost this much. I would say, but I was told this. Oh, you know what? Actually, yeah, it is going to cost this. So that just built until the point where after I had got it confirmed to the point where I could hang up the phone, I hung up the phone. I was at work during lunch, and when I made this phone call, I had to take one of the pillows in the lobby, went into an empty office, and I screamed into it.
Honestly, that sounds like a very normal reaction to that situation.
That, like, trying to schedule that MRI, that specific experience was so horrendous. It got to, like, I screamed to the pillow, but even one of my coworkers was like, Mitch, are you okay? And I was like, nope, I just,
Yeah.
And so but most of the time, whenever I have to make, like, phone calls that I know I'm just going to get upset by, especially, like, with customer support and whatnot, I just, like, I need to do this in private. I need to do this at home when if I do flip out, I can do it just within my own environment. And
that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, I find with a lot of my clients with anger issues, the best method is to just focus on, is this constructive? Does this help you get what you want? I find that very simple, logical way of framing it immediately helps reel them back. Be like, oh yeah, I'm not going to get what I want acting this way, so why am I acting this way?
Right.
Right. That logical thinking helps a lot.
So, Mr. Co-host extraordinaire, do you have any more questions about the packet?
Just one real quick one because we're near the end of the packet.
Okay.
So here, what do you hope to accomplish with this packet? Because at the very end it says, like, where am I on the spectrum is, like, your main goal with this, your main concern with this. So I just wanted you to elaborate on that, like, final thing.
I mean, yeah, like, I do want to hear from a professional, okay, what is it called this week? High function autism, or is it called...
The terms do change a lot.
Yes, and even, during the evaluation, the doctor said, yeah, no, the term gets changed a lot, and even she was annoyed by it, so I'm like,
it is confusing.
Preach, sister.
I've had clients that argue with me, like, I don't have autism, I have Asperger's, and I'm like, dog, it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
So yeah, I would like to know, hey, what specifically do I have, I guess, this week? Because, again, the terms get changed around. I want to know what I have. I want to know how it impacts me. Like, where is it a strength? Where is it a weakness? What do I need to improve?
Yeah, that was the next question to ask. Like, what deficits do you want to like improve? That's the main thing, is you want to find like the specific holes or issues you're having due to your autism diagnosis so that you can focus on them to improve them.
Yes.
That's a brilliant outlook and a very good way of going about it.
Thank you. And yes, so in the podcast and in the book, I do tell. I don't want to use the word preach, but I do strongly suggest people go get evaluated, go get tested if you can afford it, if you can. And I'm holding myself to that same standard. So it's also me not being a hypocrite. So, but like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this is just the pre-evaluation packet that they had me find out. Once I have the final results from the doctor and her recommendations for treatments and whatnot, therapy is going to be one of them. I know this for a fact. We will go over that in a future episode. But as of right now, that is all we're going to discuss regarding autism today. Thank you so much for joining us this episode. Once again, my name is Mitch Grace. I'm the author of the book Growing Up with Asperger's, Lessons Learned and Shareable Wisdom. It is available on Amazon, on Kindle, as well as on paperback. It's available now. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, once again, my co-host extraordinaire.
Thank you for having me. I love being on this podcast.
And thank you all for listening. Thank you, and take care.